Hello and welcome to this month's edition of Missouri Legislative Update. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate. This episode, we're reporting to you from the Senate chamber, where lawmakers are already busy delivering legislation to their colleagues across the hall. We'll bring you more on that later on in the show.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. Lawmakers gavelled in for the 2012 legislative session with a sense of optimism. The state's bleak budget outlook and job creation look to dominate headlines during the second annual session of the 96th General Assembly. The Missouri House gavelled in for the second annual session of the 96th General Assembly. And to the republic for which it stands. The state's 2013 operating budget grabbed headlines on opening day as lawmakers face a $500 million hole. The Speaker of the Missouri House claims they will balance the state's bottom line without attacking Missourians' pocketbooks.
And I stand here today to renew our pledge as a body to yet balance another budget. A budget balanced by making tough decisions the voters sent us here to make, not by raising taxes on hardworking Missourians.
During his opening day speech, Tilley announced his plan for the upcoming legislative session, the Blueprint for Missouri. The plan focuses on protecting the state's taxpayers, jobs, schools, and values. As lawmakers prepare to tackle the 2012 legislative session, creating jobs will share the legislative spotlight with the state's budget. The Speaker plans to create more jobs by making the state more attractive in the eyes of businesses.
We must work to create a climate where the businesses believe they can not only keep their doors open, but can grow and hire. This session, we will work to give employers the stability they need by taking a comprehensive look at all the laws affecting Missouri businesses and work to provide them with the relief they need.
However, the other side of the aisle wants the majority to take a different approach when it comes to creating jobs.
We need to make sure that, again, in our haste to become more business friendly, we do not become anti-worker. Because anti-worker means that is less money that you have to buy goods, which then doesn't allow the companies to create as many jobs.
Moving forward, many question the House's ability to work with its colleagues on the other side of the building. Lawmakers in the press point towards a rocky relationship between the two legislatures at the end of the 2011 legislative session. However, the Speaker claims he is ready to work with the Senate.
We want to start off on a good note, and I told Rob that I want to focus on areas where we agree and let's stay away from areas where we disagree. So my hope is at the beginning of the session we focus on areas that we can agree will move the state forward, and then there'll be time for areas where we disagree.
Looking forward, lawmakers must have their version of the state's operating budget on Governor Nixon's desk by Friday, May 11th at 6 p.m.
Lawmakers in the Missouri Senate convened in early January for the second regular session of the 96th General Assembly. The 34 members of the Missouri Senate utilized the opening day session to listen to the Senate President Pro Tem lay out his top priorities in his address. Senate Leader Robert N. Mayer of Dexter carried on with tradition as he announced the Senate's legislative priorities for the year, including passing a balanced budget without raising taxes.
Rather, we must act and do so swiftly to pass a balanced budget without a tax increase for the people of Missouri and to help put Missourians back to work in this stagnant and weak economy. Missouri's taxpayers and workforce deserve nothing less.
Senator Mayer also spoke about promoting economic development and commerce and reforming Missouri's workers' compensation law.
We must compete nationally and even globally in order to have new companies locate here and existing companies choose to expand their operations here. Our plan in the Senate starts by curbing excessive regulations, restoring balance to the Missouri Human Rights Act, and returning the workers' compensation system as the exclusive remedy for workplace accidents.
To ensure a world-class education for all Missouri students, Senator Mayer hopes the Senate can revise the state's school foundation formula and address recent announcements in St. Louis and Kansas City regarding school accreditations. Senator Mayer concludes by saying lawmakers will continue to work for the best interest of the citizens who elected them to the Missouri Senate.
In the Senate, we've enjoyed a very unique cooperation that bridges party lines. At the end of the day, we work together to do what is in the best interest of Missourians. With that foundation, I believe we can accomplish much this year to put Missouri on a successful, long-term, sustainable path for the future.
Before opening session began in the Missouri Senate, majority and minority leaders held a short news conference to discuss their legislative agenda for this year. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore outlines the bipartisan goals laid out by lawmakers this session.
Senators on both sides of the aisle say their top priorities this year is to help grow the economy, fund education, and most importantly, balance the state's budget. Senate President Pro Tem Robert Mayer of Dexter says this year's session can be successful if lawmakers work together.
Balancing the budget without a tax increase, also revising our foundation formula to make certain that our K through 12 school systems throughout the state of Missouri are equitably funded, and certainly taking up some provisions and measures that will create job opportunities and economic commerce for the state of Missouri.
Senate Minority Floor Leader Victor Callahan of Independence says unemployment is too high in Missouri and balancing the state's budget will be difficult. But he's optimistic lawmakers can work together to solve these problems.
The state still faces very serious challenges financially and where we're going. As hopefully the American economy emerges from this recession, we have tremendous opportunities in the state to move forward. I've had the honor of working in a very bipartisan way in the Senate with Senator Dempsey and Senator Mayer and others.
Both parties stressed their desire to work together to fully fund the K through 12 foundation formula and agree that education is the key to economic development in the future.
We do have some stress and strain on particular issues, but that's because they're difficult issues to deal with. And I think it's going to be a very productive year, and one where we're going to be able to advance the priorities of the state and protect education as our number one priority.
Senate Appropriations Chairman Senator Kurt Schaefer of Columbia agrees it will be another tough budget year, but is hopeful that lawmakers and the governor can work together to balance the budget.
I've been asked by several of you, what's the budget hole and what are we going to have to do? And a lot of those things, rely upon the governor. The constitutional process is very clearly dictated. The agencies work with the governor. That's where most of the money goes, and the governor develops that over a period of several months. And I eagerly look forward to the state of the state when we find out what the governor's proposals are.
Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Job creation and balancing the state's budget dominated Governor Jay Nixon's annual State of the State address. In this next story, we talked with members from both sides of the aisle to get their impressions on the governor's primetime speech.
The governor of the state of Missouri now approaches the chamber.
Governor Jay Nixon delivered his annual primetime speech in front of a packed House chamber. The speech was met with pensive stares from one side of the chamber and cheers from the other. Job creation and balancing the state's budget dominated Nixon's speech. The governor called for lawmakers to do all they could to help bring jobs to the Show Me state. However, one lawmaker criticized Nixon for being all talk and no substance.
The two things I was looking for was a specific plan as to what we are substantively going to do this session, and also I was looking for specific proposals from the governor as to how we were going to exactly balance the budget. And with the exception of a couple of items I wrote down, I did not see any specifics in either of those categories.
On the other side of the aisle, the House's top Democrat was pleased with Nixon's primetime speech.
I think that he did a good job talking about the things that I definitely have been talking about, whether it be the budget, job creation, economic development, and education. And I think those three things are going to basically monopolize most of the time that we spend down here this year.
Many lawmakers were anxious to hear the governor's remarks regarding the state's operating budget, specifically how he recommends attacking the state's budget shortfall. Nixon announced cuts to state workers and higher education while increasing funds for K-12 education. However, Jones wanted to know more. He wanted to know how Nixon plans to deal with the state's $500 million shortfall.
We expect him to put forth an agenda as to what he would like the legislature to concentrate on to help create an environment, to create jobs, and how we're going to balance a budget that everyone agrees is $500 to $700 million out of whack and needs some major balancing. I did not pick up on many specifics in the speech tonight.
The budget process is for the specificity. When he gives the budget to everybody, then we'll see exactly what he wanted, and these are the highlights that he wants to talk about.
And with the balanced budget I present tonight.
Following the governor's State of the State address, he released his proposal for the state's 2013 operating budget. All eyes now turn to the General Assembly, as lawmakers must truly agree and finally pass the state's budget by the May 11th constitutional deadline.
Senators joined members of the House in a joint session to hear the governor's 2012 State of the State address. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has reaction to the speech from Senate leaders on both sides of the aisle.
The governor's speech focused on many of the same goals lawmakers have proposed this year in the Senate, including running a more efficient state government, creating more job opportunities for Missourians, and balancing the budget. The governor's recommendations regarding the state's operating budget, specifically how to fill the estimated $500 million shortfall with cuts to state employees and higher education funding, were met with some skepticism. Senate Appropriations Chairman Senator Kurt Schaefer of Columbia was displeased about the governor's recommendations to cut funding to higher education.
It's just unacceptable. And I think that when you look at the last 3 years, the pattern that you see, this budget has been balanced for 3 straight years on the back of public education. And that's K through 12 and higher ed. And I did notice that the governor mentioned, for example, that he was going to carry things over flat for K through 12 from this year to next year. I'm assuming that includes the over $50 million in cuts to transportation that the governor imposed. Remember, we added money back in, especially on transportation. We put in $7 million for this year. The governor took it back out. When you add that to higher ed, I actually think that I have to go back and look at the numbers, so I need to be careful. But I think we actually funded higher education, K through 12, higher last year than the governor is going to propose for 2013.
Senator Timothy Green of Spanish Lake, a member on the Senate Appropriations Committee, says the governor's proposed cuts to higher education are tough, but a lot of other agencies who rely on state funding have already gone through the same kind of cuts in recent history.
We have to live within our means just like the taxpayer does, and there's only so much money. So I know higher education over the last 3 fiscal years gets a total decrease of 25%. You have to go where the revenue is spent, and that is one of the areas. I know there's a lot of people unhappy, but we've cut back the last several years social services, corrections, trying to protect elementary and secondary, and unfortunately higher education took some of the brunt.
Missouri is one of a handful of states across the country that is constitutionally required to balance the state budget. The General Assembly must approve all appropriation bills by May 11 of this year. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
Coming up next on Missouri Legislative Update, we'll highlight several Senate and House bills that are swiftly moving through the legislative process. Stay tuned.
Welcome home, man.
I'm starving. What's for breakfast?
Guten Tag!
Johannes, Franz!
I bring you arts-enriched Raisinblams, fortified with increased test scores and creative problem-solving skills.
It's good!
And good for you. Bobby? Susie? Don't worry, that's just the power of the arts!
Feed your kids the arts. For 10 simple ways to learn how, visit AmericansForTheArts.org.
Welcome back. Members of the Missouri House approved a proposed constitutional amendment limiting the growth of state government. Lawmakers claim the proposal will help protect the state's bottom line.
This HJR so that we rein in the bureaucracy.
The Missouri House gave its stamp of approval to a proposed constitutional amendment limiting the growth of state government. House Joint Resolution 43 limits the growth of the general revenue portion of the state's budget to the previous year's budget plus the appropriations limit. The Consumer Price Index, the annual percentage change in the state's population, and 1.5% of the previous year's budget make up the growth limit. The sponsor of the resolution claims the legislation is intended to protect the state's bottom line.
This is the bill that keeps the expenditures stable in the state of Missouri, so that times when we have boom and bust cycles, we're able to wisely put the excess revenues aside for future savings.
However, opponents don't agree. They claim the proposal ties the hands of lawmakers when it comes to making budget decisions.
What it does is it puts this into automatic pilot. This great overcorrection of a problem that exists because we're in a downturned economy is not the right way to go about managing the affairs of our states today, tomorrow, for the next 5 years and into the future.
Lawmakers approved the proposal with more than 100 yes votes. The resolution was the first piece of legislation passed during the 2012 legislative session. If approved by the General Assembly, the proposal still needs to receive voter approval before becoming law.
In addition to committee hearings, Missouri senators have begun debate on several key pieces of legislation for 2012. Senate Communications correspondent Dean Morgan takes a look at 3 of these bills.
Senate Bill 443 would change state law to comply with federal law when it comes to driving privileges for repeat DWI offenders. In addition, it would allow Missouri to move some transportation dollars from MoDOT's legal department into the state's construction fund. Sponsor, Senator Bill Stouffer of Napton, tells his colleagues this would be helpful at a time when MoDOT's budget is shrinking.
This is an update to the DWI and CDL laws in the state of Missouri. Because Missouri is out of compliance on the DWI, we allowed, in our law that we passed 2 years ago, we allowed for hardships to be determined by the Department of Revenue. The federal government does not allow for that, and so we bring the state law back in compliance with federal regulations. As a result of our being out of compliance, they are withholding $16 million from construction and highway construction fund, requiring that to be spent in the safety area. So this will allow us to get that back into the construction fund.
Senator Ryan McKenna of Crystal City further explains how federal funds would be expedited to Missouri's construction fund if the measure is approved by the General Assembly and signed by the governor.
Last year when we passed the DWI bill, the Fed said that we didn't follow their rules, and $60 million would now have to be spent on safety. What the senator is doing is clarifying it in this language, so now that $16 million can go back and be spent on construction, what it was spent on prior to that.
Senate Bill 443 received final passage in the Senate and now is in the Missouri House of Representatives. Senate Bill 467 was also sent to the House. Senator Brian Munslinger of Williamstown sponsors the measure, which he says would require state agencies to track federal money they receive.
What this bill basically does is say that the receiving district or division would be responsible for tracking that money to make sure that it is accounted for.
Senator Timothy Green of Spanish Lake offered an amendment that was added to the original bill.
Basically, what I'm doing is we have to appropriate the attorney's fees when the state loses cases.
Another measure, Senate Bill 592, was debated for several hours by Missouri senators. Bill sponsor, Senator Brad Lager of Savannah, says his proposal would modify the law relating to the Missouri Human Rights Act and employment discrimination.
Beginning in 2003, the Missouri courts have reshaped the traditional handling of employment law. Unfortunately, these court opinions have lowered the bar for plaintiffs bringing lawsuits to the point where we are now the worst place in the nation to be sued from that perspective.
Senator Jolie Justice of Kansas City asks the sponsor if the measure would exempt not-for-profit organizations.
Someone contacted my office with a concern that this is going to exempt all nonprofit organizations from being defined as employer.
Senate Bill 592 has been given first-round approval and would need another positive vote before moving on to the House. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Dean Morgan.
The Missouri House gave its stamp of approval to legislation changing the Missouri Accountability Portal. In this next story, we take a look at how lawmakers hope to increase transparency through the legislation. The Missouri House gave its stamp of approval to legislation altering the Missouri Accountability Portal. House Bill 1140 adds schools, local counties, and other municipalities to the list of government entities included on the portal. The Accountability Portal is a website listing how Missouri citizens' tax dollars are spent. The sponsor of the proposal claims the bill is all about transparency.
We're just trying to create one central database in where Missourians can go
and they can click on saying, we want to see what Salem High School is spending. We want to see how much Dent County cash flow is, how much their debt is. And I think more open, more transparent government is the key.
According to the legislation's fiscal note, the bill will not cost the state any general revenue. Despite the fiscal note, opponents argue the legislation could still harm the state's bottom line.
We need to be very careful about imposing new rules and new regulations that make things more difficult, that make the work of these offices harder, that tend to make them have to employ more people to get the work done.
I believe just clicking a mouse twice and sending that copy to another different agency is really not an extra expense that these municipalities will have.
Lawmakers approved the bill with more than 110 yes votes. The legislation now heads to the Senate for consideration. Up next on Missouri, legislative update. We take a look at a proposal aiming to protect one of Missourians' most important rights. And members of the Missouri Senate look at ways to make Missouri's roads safer. That and more after the break on Missouri Legislative Update.
I present to you Algebra 2, Foreign Languages, and finally, Biology. Who among you will step up to their challenge? Me. Yeah, I'll do it. Me too. Sign me up.
Take on the tough classes now. You need them to prepare for college.
Whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong, we belong, we belong, we belong together.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Welcome back. The House Elections Committee approved a proposal requiring photo identification to vote. In this next story, we take a look at how one lawmaker aims to protect the integrity of the voting process by requiring voters to prove their identity at the polling place.
We don't need to have any question regarding
The House Elections Committee approved legislation requiring photo identification in order to vote. The legislation requires the state to provide photo identification to those who don't have an ID. The sponsor of the proposal claims the legislation aims to protect the voting process.
I want to make sure that when I'm casting my ballot, which is an honest ballot, that someone else who would be casting a fraudulent ballot isn't taking my votes away by their fraudulent vote.
If someone trying to vote doesn't have a photo ID, the bill allows them to cast a provisional ballot. However, opponents have a problem with the provisional ballot language. They claim it limits when people can participate in the process.
We've already determined that this bill is for most people, and yet it's only for major elections that you're able to cast that provisional ballot, correct?
This isn't the first time lawmakers have debated this type of legislation.
Since 2006, this has been considered a partisan issue.
In my opinion, that's very sad that you've come to that conclusion.
The committee approved the proposal by a vote of 7-3. The legislation must be approved by the House Rules Committee before moving to the floor for debate.
A law passed in 2009 banned texting while driving for Missourians under 21. This session, the Senate Transportation Committee is working on a bill that would extend the texting while driving ban to everyone regardless of age. Senate Communications correspondent Brad Bayshore has more on Senate Bill 567.
Senator Robin Wright Jones of St. Louis is sponsoring a measure that would prohibit all drivers, regardless of age, from texting while driving.
We are looking at prudent ways to make sure our drivers are paying close attention to the road. Those of us who've gotten our driver's licenses in the 60s, I won't call any names, but you know, the mantra at that time was keep your eyes on the road. We do not hear that anymore. A lot of things are distracting us.
Senate Bill 567 would also make it illegal for anyone to be pulled over solely for texting and driving, making the law a secondary offense. Several committee members expressed their concerns about not making the punishment a primary traffic offense.
I also don't understand why we're making this a secondary law, because under the way the law is now, for anyone 21 or under, they can be pulled over. You're changing that and taking away the age restriction, but then you're also making this kind of to mirror the seatbelt law, that you have to have another violation to be ticketed for texting.
I would not be in favor of this going forward without it being primary. I think not having the primary secondary seat belt is the worst law that we have on the books here. We don't give any other law where a state patrolman can see somebody breaking the law and not enforce it. And if we create a second situation where that same situation where the state patrolman sees somebody breaking the law and can't enforce it, I just think that we're creating a problem.
Senate Transportation Committee Chairman Senator Bill Stouffer of Napton says Missouri needs more safe drivers and would like to see that the age limit be removed from the current texting while driving law.
I think it's extremely important that drivers, when they get behind the wheel, become drivers and operators and keep their and I have texting is bad. I'd like to see the age limit removed. It went out of here removed, but the folks that put the age limit on are now in the Senate, and I have a feeling we're not going to get that done.
As of this taping, the Senate Transportation Committee has not yet approved the measure. Reporting for the Missouri Senate, I'm Brad Bayshore.
And that's our show for this month. If you have any questions about the legislation or committees that appeared in this program, please visit www.senate.mo.gov. There you'll find the contact information for the 34 members of the Missouri Senate, as well as a link to the Senate's newsroom website. I'm Jennifer Yapel reporting for the Missouri Senate. Thanks for watching.
And I'm Jonathan Lorenz reporting for the Missouri House of Representatives. If you have any questions regarding anything going on in the Missouri House, you can visit our website at www.house.mo.gov. We leave you this month with the sights and sounds from the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration from the Capitol Rotunda on January 10th. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again next time on Missouri Legislative Update.
May our work here in the Capitol, our communities reflect the vision and dreams of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
He was a powerful leader with an even more powerful message on unity and promoting interracial and intercultural cooperation and sharing.
Today, as we remember and celebrate the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we're constantly reminded that although so much progress has been made over the decades, we must continue the work that Dr. King